here with you all. So so it's great to be here with you. Now, one of the things I wanted to ask before we begin is, what's one question that you hope to have an answer to as part of this, sort of little Zoom meeting? And the other one is, what's one fear about going into quote unquote private practice? Oh, Sarah's here, but she doesn't want you all to see her face. Okay. No.
LOL.
That was a mystery of the chat.
Yes. So I don't know if you heard my question, Sarah, if you got.
I got the second part, the one fear. What was the first part?
One question you would like for me to answer for you today. So before we begin, I want to start with that.
We have so many people to pull from right now, Sylvia. I think I'll start with the fear. I think the fear is a lot to do with the financial piece. And I think the comfort, quote unquote comfort that myself, I'll just speak for myself, that I've had within agency work or nonprofit work. And a lot of that just has to do with the unknown, and making that known will be easier to then take that step. So I think is making sure that there's enough funds coming in to cover what I need. So bottom line, money.
Right.
And I think I didn't come in having one particular question, but I think I'm open to hearing everything that can be shared around this topic.
Okay.
I think that the fear, which is also easier for me to answer first, is the stability and money stuff that Yolanda's talking about. And then also just like, what if I don't like it? And the commitment feels so different than being in an agency setting where it's like, this is where I work and you give 2 weeks notice. And if you're really nice, you give 4 weeks notice. But the commitment piece of that. And then I think a question that I have is, if and when I want to make that transition to where private practice is a more full-time thing, like how do you set yourself up to be able to do that? Because you can't be doing both full-time, and it takes a while to build up like a full-time income from the private practice thing. So like, how do you set yourself up to make that transition? And I guess also experiences that you've had with building in other types of consulting or evaluation kind of work in addition to the ongoing therapy as part of a private practice setup.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with everything that's been said. I'll add like how to actually build a load of patients that's full time, like what's required to do that. And like, I also wonder about like the anxiety of like losing a patient when it's your full-time job. Like it feels a lot heavier. And I wonder if how that affects the work itself. Like if it's like, this is my full-time job, if I lose people, it's like a problem. If that's not really a problem, I'm curious about that.
Okay. Good. So I think I hope to answer all those questions. So I'm going to start with, how do you get there, right? So one of the things is choosing a timeline. So I think one of the things you have to keep in mind is that if you're going to switch over to doing it full time, it's not going to happen in 2 months. So you slowly build up, while you keep your job, you slowly build up your patients. And then there's going to be that critical number where if you're seeing 10 people, or 15 people, there's only so many hours in the day. But if you work evenings for a couple of months, you build up the number. And now I think it's easier because of Zoom. So to really sort of think strategically about setting a timeline of, okay, I'm going to do in the next 6 months. Usually I would say take 3 to 6 months at least. The more you are intentional about it, the easier it becomes. The other thing about it is that, and you spoke about this a little bit, is I think personally, I did this because I get bored of doing just one thing, but I think it's important to diversify your income, meaning that, yeah, some of the bulk of your money might come from seeing patients, but to also think about doing either consulting work for like agencies and so forth, to do some workshops about certain topic, to also do supervision. And now we're gonna, Michael and I are talking about wanting all of you at some point to teach classes, so this way you have different income housing, like it's not from one person, right? I don't know, I mean, all right, so I'm gonna address some of the fears now. So one of the fears is, well, if one person leaves, well, how am I going to feel? Well, I think if one person leaves, you might be a little anxious, but you're not going to feel that anxious because you don't get the bulk of your income from one person, unless you have someone who pays you $1,000 a week, which I doubt that, I don't have that right now. So if you guys do it, that's more power to you. And what I would say is, if you end up having someone that pays you $1,000 a week, pretend you don't. Pretend they're paying you, let's say 200, and put everything into savings for a year and don't look at the money. And that's for two reasons. Obviously, economically for you, so that if they leave, you don't feel like, wow, what am I going to do now? And also clinically, because they would have so much power over you. So when they would say, I want to leave or I want to reschedule a session, if you've gotten used to the money every week, it's going to be very hard to be like, no, Susie, we can't reschedule, or no, you can't, you could leave if you want to. And I say, once you get to making more than $500 a week from one person, put the rest that you're making away and just ignore it. The other thing that I was afraid of, so when I started this, I was nervous too, because I thought, oh, well, if everyone leaves, I'm not going to have any money. And how am I going to sort of do what pay my bills? What I didn't realize is that when you actually work for an agency, you could get fired at any moment. And sure, you could get unemployment, which before the pandemic was what, $400 max a week. And that's going to be your new income. I don't believe, unless you do something very crazy, that 20 of the people that you see are going to leave in one day. So I feel I've discovered that the security is actually much more present than when you work for an employer who at any moment could be like, that's it, I'm done. So that's just something to keep in mind. I think also something to keep in mind is to work through the anxiety. If you are seeing 10 people and one person leaves, just trust that eventually someone's going to come rather than panic. If you're an anxious person, you got to work at that. I mean, I have a patient who was actually working. Well, I don't have him anymore. He left, but he finished. But he was working in the jewelry business, and he was such an anxious person. So when he went into his own business, he ended up doing better than working for a company. But half of his time, he was just anxious about it, because like, I don't know what's going to happen. So you have to learn how to manage that. Otherwise, you're going to be anxious all the time. Although in my experience, I think if you end up seeing people for therapy and you end up seeing them regularly, people don't leave that often. They might leave in the first few weeks when you start working with them. But if someone commits to the process, I haven't had people that left 2 years in and be like, I'm done. So it's just something to keep in mind. And also, you will know when they want to leave because you're working with them. So it's not going to be a surprise to you. And because of the way we work is you always, when termination happens, it's not an event, it's a process that has taken time. So for example, I know now who's going to leave this year. So I have to do my calculations. Well, if Susie leaves and she's paying $50, let's say that means I have a low fee slot available. If Susie leaves and she's paying $300, that means I have to find someone who's going to pay that. But I already know. So when I interview people that I might want to work with, I have a reference point of what I'm able to take and not able to take and what I could afford. And we'll talk about how to have that reference point. If you don't have that point, I know this from experiences, you're going to end up hearing a lot of stories. They're going to move you, and you're going to accept people that you shouldn't accept because either you can't afford it or you've seen enough, it's not, you're seeing too many people. So you're just adding people, but you don't have the capacity. So I think having the number of hours, the amount of money you should make, and the slots for each low fee, medium fee, and so forth would be helpful in making those decisions, and to set those boundaries when someone's like, you hear the story and like, I really want to work with this person. So do you have any questions about that so far?
Do you have an example fee scale you can show us?
I will, and I'll do that later on.
Okay.
Now the second thing, which is just logistics, is to not forget to switch your malpractice insurance from part-time to full-time. It's not a lot. Even your malpractice insurance actually goes up as you go in years, which makes sense because you're more likely to get sued. But it's, even for me, after all these like 15 years, whatever, it's $270 a year. So it's not a lot, but just to remember to do that. The other thing is, I cannot stress how important, it may feel so small, how important it is to get a Psychology Today profile. The reason for that is because if you're not a social worker or a therapist or anything in the field of mental health and you look for a therapist, everyone will tell you to go there, or you'll believe that if someone doesn't have a Psychology Today profile, they may not really be legit or something's wrong. It seems stupid, but trust me, it's true. So it's just a small, I think it's what, $29, $30 a month. It's a small price to pay for legitimacy, quote unquote. And I think it's just something to do. I highly recommend it because they might look on the critical therapy website, which is great, but people who may not come to critical therapy, or people who might just be wary and be like, well, I want to make sure that this is real. They will do that. The other thing about referrals is that we, obviously you're going to get some referrals to critical therapy. We've had a lot of referrals this year. We haven't, I think, because of COVID. Now more referrals are coming in, I think, because of COVID. To really sort of think about what are other sources besides clinical therapy, of like, what are some of your friends, you can get referrals from your friends. You could get referrals from your old job, for example, if they allow you to. You could get referrals from different, groups that you're a part of, to sort of think about what are your referrals, and not just for patients, but also for other work, like consulting or workshops or different, or supervision. I mean, ideally, I would like for you to do supervision here because we're going to need more and more people to be supervised, but you could also do it outside. I used to supervise people that were not part of critical therapy. I no longer do that because I don't have time. Now, and I think to really, and this is, I started this conversation, I think in the beginning, it would really help to think of what you might want to specialize in. Because sometimes when you go out there and you're like, I want to work with couples. Like, for example, I'm using that example because very few people at critical therapy want to work with couples, except for Michael, I think. So right now I'm the only person that gets couples. Now, I'm not saying you should do that, but I'm saying if I know that's an interest, it makes it easier for me when I get a couple to just refer that person. If you say, I want to work with people who have addictions, then it's very easy for me to refer that person to you. I mean, for example, Rebecca has, has sort of trained and has KSAC stuff. So I know that if someone is battling addictions, I'm just going to refer it to her. So it doesn't mean, I'm not going to pigeonhole you that that's going to be all your patients, but I think it helps to figure out what is the stuff you want to work with. As I said in the beginning, I don't know if everyone was here, it's like mine is, PTSD and trauma, and by default is childhood sexual abuse and domestic violence and all that stuff. But that's not all that I do, and also that is something that's unique, which is I also do like religious people who are trying to escape religious cults or, persecution and so forth. And that's very unique. Actually, some of the people that came to me found me through some like Yahoo group or something that someone mentioned me because just couldn't find a therapist that does that. So it's good to think about what that might be. And then we could talk about what are some of the things you should read and what are some of the things that you should be prepared for and so forth. So yeah, I think that's really about sort of marketing, part of it. I don't know if you have any questions about that.
I have one question that might be related here, or it might be something you're already going to talk about, but I'm wondering a little bit more about your thoughts on getting put on an insurance panel and then also being somebody who's a provider and you get referrals through the insurance company?
Okay, great, excellent question. If you're a critical therapy, by default, you probably won't be able to be on an insurance panel. The reason for that is when you actually sign a contract with, let's say, Blue Cross Blue Shield, there are two problems, but I'll tell you why you can't because of critical therapy, and I'll tell you my second problem with them. So the first one is, so you sign the contract, and in that contract, you work for the insurance company, and effectively, everyone that you see that has Blue Cross Blue Shield, regardless of income, you have to charge them the same amount of money. So you can't, it's illegal if, let's say, Blue Cross Blue Shield pays you $100, someone comes to you and you're supposed to charge them 50, that's easy. You're like, no, I have to charge you 100, the insurance pays you. That's the easy part. But if someone comes to you and you're supposed to charge them, 200 or 300, and you sign that contract, you can't do that. You have to charge them the fee because they're not paying you. The insurance pays you. And then the second part of that is that you effectively work for the insurance company, which means that they could request documents. They could request for you to do more work. Like sometimes they'll be like, well, I need an email explaining why this person needs 2 or 3 sessions a week. That might happen even if you're out of network, but if you're in network, you have to do what they want you to do, and you have to provide whatever paperwork they want you to do. Whereas if you're out of network, you can negotiate. Like I had an insurance company that was like, I want the records. I'm like, I'm not giving you the session notes. I could give you a letter explaining what we talked about or why this is needed. I could they sometimes do an evaluation with you where they call you for 45 minutes and they ask you all these questions about symptoms and why this person needs this therapy and what are your goals and whatever, but they seldom say, they've never said, unless you give me the notes, I'm not going to pay for it. Whereas if you're in network, they could say that. So yeah, I think the biggest part is that and I don't know if they still have this, so don't quote me on it. I think I would have to do some research. In the past, if you're a member of a panel, like if you signed with Blue Cross Blue Shield, I think there were a couple of months, like 3 months after you came off, that you couldn't charge more. I don't know if that's still the case. So you're very locked in to certain, and I don't know how, to certain guidelines. I don't know how long, I don't know if it's a year contract or if you could do it like a 6 months. I've never done it, but I know there's certain requirements. Okay, the other thing is a little bit of logistics, which you probably should have done this by now, and you probably have done it, is to set up a separate account, whether it's a business account, and keep track of all your expenses. I used to be really not very good about this, in the sense that I was good at keeping track of my expenses, but I would keep like 1 million receipts of everything I ever did. And I still have a spreadsheet. But what I've done, which is smarter, is I just opened a credit card and charged everything on that credit card. So then you have that. I was like, actually, it was funny. One of my patients who had a business was like, I just have a credit card. I don't even keep receipts. And I'm like, what? This is like 5 years in. I'm like, you don't keep receipts? This could make my life so much easier. So now I kind of do that because it's much easier. So it's just something to keep in mind. What you will learn is that you will deduct a lot from taxes. A lot of people don't realize how much they can deduct. For example, your phone, your rent, your Zoom, your internet, your computer, your books, lunches, if they're working lunches, dinners, dinners now are only half, they used to be half of what you spend. Now, because of COVID, this year is 100% of what you spend. So there are certain tax breaks that you could take advantage of. What's interesting is you can't take advantage of like buying a Metro card, because that would be considered like, well, it's part of going to work. However, if you take a cab because you worked late, you could deduct that from taxes because it's not an everyday thing, which is weird how our tax system works. But anyway, also, I'm not an accountant, so you should probably consult an accountant and figure out what accountant you want to choose. One that's very conservative, which is like what you could do and not do. One that's more like, well, there are loopholes in every system, whatever you choose, but it does help to know what are your boundaries. I don't know if you have questions about that.
When you said rent, did you mean office rent or your apartment?
Well, office rent, if you're using your apartment, and you could ask, you know, an accountant, in the past, it's like, there's this weird thing where you have to measure how much of your apartment you're using for your office and then multiply by some crazy deduction. And then that would be the number you deduct. Or I don't remember the number anymore. Or there used to be like $270 or something like that per month that you could just deduct from your rent if you're just using the rent. So either one, but you can't do both. So one of the things that you can't be like, well, I have an office and I also, well, actually I think you can do both, because if you're working from home because of Zoom, you could deduct both that $270, let's say, if that's what it is, plus your rent from your office. Yeah. Utilities, you know, and all that stuff. Not for home, utilities for the office, but we don't pay utilities because it's included in the rent. So, yeah. Now, I also want to say that I think, you know, and you know this because you're doing it, but I do think there is a sense of, you know, especially in the beginning, it feels like you have to really be intentional and work more. And what I mean by that is sort of like, you know, if you're trying to build a caseload of people, is that, you know, when they call you back, you call them back right away. You know, it's sort of like all these, like, you don't have to run after them, and it doesn't mean it change anything that we ever do. I mean, I still tell people before they come on to really think if they want to embark on this journey. I just told this lady today, I was like, if you don't want to do the work, don't come, because I'm not interested. But I also think it's important to be intentional and to sort of like set up one of the things I know is when people call, they're probably that urge to come to therapy might last a day or two. After that, they might not want to. So I think if you get them while it's hot, it actually sends a sense of responsibility. Well, now I talked to this person, maybe I should do the consultation, which might be helpful. I mean, I found that to be helpful, you know. Because I think when you work in agencies, it's very easy because you get the referrals. It's sort of like, oh, I could wait, you know, I can wait a week or so forth. Whereas I think here is a little different, just because I think it takes a lot for people to call, because they're calling blank. They don't know who you are. Even with critical therapy, they're just calling out there, be like, I need therapy, help me. And they're going to call other people, but also it's more like they need help. Like this lady, I talked to her, was it Monday? Oh, I think, no, she called me on Friday. I didn't answer. I talked to her on Monday, and then she came in. And I'm pretty sure if she didn't come this week, I don't know if she would have come, but not because of me, but because of her own ambivalence about the process. Hopefully she'll come back. I don't know. I mean, I think she will, but I usually give myself 2-3 sessions before I think they committed. So now I'm going to get a little bit into how much money do you want to make and how many hours do you want to work? So I am going to share that sort of my little like chart that I did. I do have to say this. Think about how many hours you want to work a week. And what I mean by work a week is I've done how many patient hours you have, which could be the same person that you see a couple of times a week. Also, it includes the consulting and it includes all the other income. I broke this down by sort of patients. But it doesn't have to be that way, but it's just something to keep in mind. Also, I don't know. I mean, sure. I mean, I do think I used to work 35 hours a week in the beginning. You could do that. It's a lot of work psychologically. So I think to set yourself for that, you might be like, maybe that's too much. And you got to figure out what your pace is. I used to do it. I loved it, but then my life sort of had other things to do. So I had to slow down a little bit. But it's something to keep in mind. So I did this chart, which I have to figure out, how do I share screen? Oh, I see how I do it.
It says on the bottom, share screen.
Thank you. I am so, like, how does this work? Screen. Is it working? Yeah, right? You guys see my little thing?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So this is I'm going to go over these numbers. So I did version 1 with without health insurance. And I have a version 2 with health insurance. Health insurance costs a lot. So this is a version 1 where you, as you could look at after taxes, you would make about $77,000 a year. I think that should be, because all of you are, except for Michael, all of you are sort of mid-career, or you're not just starting out. I don't think in New York City, at our age or your age, less than $77,000 is going to cut it, but you could correct me if you need less, more power to you. But I also think you have to think about a living wage that's not going to make you feel that you're struggling, so you hate your job. I came to 80,000, but I stand correctly if you don't agree, which means that you would take home $1,480. That would be your weekly pay after taxes, after everything. That's what you take home. Now, in order to make that, you're going to get taxed roughly at 30%. Now, it's not that simple. It's probably less, but I did the most just so you get an idea. So if you get taxed at 30%, that means your salary before taxes needs to be around 110. Now, remember those expenses, which I put in this about $1,000 a month for rent. Most of you will probably not pay that much, but I just put more just in case. So $1,000, so 10,000 goes to rent. The other 10,000 would be other expenses. Now that could be less or more depending on what you're doing. If you're taking cabs everywhere, it might be more, and so forth. So now we're looking at $130,000 a year that you need to make in order to make that salary. You will work on average. I am very conservative. I'm going to put 46 weeks a year. The reason why I put 46 weeks and not 52, it's because you're going to have vacations. Your patients will have vacations. You might get sick. They may get sick. You might work more than 46 weeks, but it's better to be conservative rather than think you're working more and not. So at 46 weeks a year, and I said you would work 28 hours a week. That's patient time. So you will have 28 hours of contact time, and you could add another 3 for paperwork, but I didn't put that in the numbers of how much money, So altogether you would work 30 hours a week and take home $1,480. Now, in order to take that, $1,400 at home, you actually need to make, because of taxes, because of your expenses, blah, 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 about $2,850 a week. You're like, oh my God. Yeah, it feels like that until you do the numbers. So I said, now notice, I said you would work 28 hours a week, but I actually averaged 22 hours of patient time, right? Or consulting or whatever. So if you look at this really low number, you have one person, let's say, that's paying you less than $50. So I just said $10 a week. You have 6 people that pay you between 50 and 75. And what I did is I said 3 that pay you 50, 3 that pay you 75, that's 375. Again, 6 people that pay you between 80 and 150. Now, some of them are really conservative numbers because I don't think everyone's going to pay you $50, but okay. Then you have 6 people that pay you 175 or 250, and then you have 3 people that pay you 275. Now, this could go up and down, but if you look at the scale, you're working 22 hours and you're getting paid already $3,000 a week, which means you're going to make the money that you need before taxes and the money that you need after taxes. We're going to leave that there because I got to blow my nose and you may have questions. Do you have questions?
I have a question. How often do patients come in paying 175 and above?
Usually average session in New York City is 175 out of network. And that's for so often, that's the expectation. And most people that pay out of network will pay 175 or more. So it's kind of like a standard fee. So you'll probably have more people at 175 probably than 250, but that could that's, it depends on the referral. Also, if you do consulting, you should get paid at least, depending, if you do it for a big company, you should get paid 175 to 200. If you do a, like, let's say, I don't know, the Bronx Defenders or whatever, the defenders out there, they're a big agency, so they should, we have a sliding scale based on their income. So if they have millions of dollars, then they can be paying you $50 a session, for your consulting work.
Could you scroll back up, Sylvia? Just for, just wanna. Okay. And I think I cut out a little bit or missed the part when you were describing the expenses.
Okay.
And when you were estimating what you included in that, like rent, other
Yeah, so-
types of living costs and insurance, or was that?
Yeah, no, I'll give you the one with the insurance later.
Okay.
because more. No, the expenses are just your rent and everything else, like books, classes, 10,000. I put 10,000 for rent, 10,000 for the rest. The truth is two things. The truth is, I don't think you're gonna really spend $10,000 for rent because we're all sharing an office. So if you're using 2 days or 2 days and a half, it would cost you maybe $800 or something. But just go with 1,000 just in case. Right now, it would actually be less because our rent came down because the landlord is giving us a discount. And then the other thing to keep in mind when we talk about expenses, right? So, this is the trick about, the way the tax system is set up. So if you end up sort of deducting a lot of the books that you buy, if you end up deducting your phone, if you may have a lot of expenses, but effectively those expenses are kind of part of your salary because you're no longer paying those things out of your budget. And I would advise you to do that because you're using it for work and because it's money before taxes that you deduct. So it's important to figure out what those deductions are, and a lot of it is stuff that you actually could probably be spending $200, $300 maybe a month that you now deduct before taxes. Now, if you look at my second version with health insurance, because health insurance, and then I have to tell you a plan that we have to solve this problem. So if you, Michael and I did a lot of research on this, and you could speak if you want to, like all of the health plans, is like, no, yeah, all the health plans we looked out there, and they're very shitty. And even the ones that are $500, $600, $700, they don't really cover much. So if you want to have health insurance that would cover benefits and including mental health, a lot of them don't, for example, which is weird because I didn't think they could do that. But anyway, it would cost you around $1,000 to $1,500 a month. So you have to make more money because around 18,000, that's before taxes, but still 18,000 or 20,000 of your expenses will go to health insurance. Now, one of our plans is there's a way around it. Apparently, I don't know why, there must be some loophole, some craziness of why this is set up this way. If you work for an employer and the employer contracts with the insurance company, that premium, that number that you have to pay is much less. I think it's a weird way to make sure that people never work for themselves and they're like sort of working for someone and have a boss and sort of work for big companies. So one of the things now, also you'll notice it says CTI. As I don't know if you guys know, I don't know if I talked to all of you about it. We are in the process of getting approval from the DOE to change our name to the Critical Therapy Institute instead of center, but we can't use that till we get approval. Hopefully we will soon and so forth. So one of the loopholes that I'm thinking about doing with people who want to work full time is that instead of getting paid directly by the people that you work with, you could still get paid a certain amount from them. I have to figure out with this payroll company, what is the minimum amount of hours that you could work per week in order to receive medical insurance. Now, remember, they don't care what you're making. You could be making $20 an hour and work for like 30 hours doing something. Like you could teach a class and it's like, well, that takes 20 hours or whatever. And if you're on payroll, then that will be that deductible will not be that much. Your health insurance could cost $500 or $300. So that's something that I'm looking in as people are going to transition, or when they do and want to do, sort of like this private practice, quote unquote, we could look into if it makes sense to just be on payroll for X amount of hours, so you don't have to have that big chunk of money that comes out of your pocket. So yeah, I don't know if you have questions about that or if that's confusing, but. Okay. Yeah.
Oh, I was gonna say, how do you calculate retirement planning and things like that in there? I've been thinking about that a little bit with what my employer matches. And so how does that, because obviously they don't pay everything, but what they match and how that contribution works and what calculation that looks like on top and added in.
Yeah, I didn't. This is the two things. This is like the minimum that it's sort of like, okay, I should be making around $80,000 and these are the expenses. I think to really, and also this is why I left it, all my numbers are 26 to 28 hours. So in the beginning, you might want to work like 30 or 35 and calculate some of that. I think what could be helpful about your retirement funds is, again, that's pre-taxed. So actually, if you let's say you end up making a lot of money one year, for some reason you make 160,000, you're like, oh man, a lot of that money is going to go towards taxes, like 30%. So you could take a big chunk of it. Let's say I'm just going to put 30,000 into an IRA, and then that gets deducted from what you make, and then it doesn't get taxed, basically. So that's something that, as you sort of think of doing that, we could talk more, or you could figure out what numbers you need to play around with to make sure that that works. And I guess one of the things I didn't think about is to talk to this payroll company that's doing their health insurance, if they could also figure out if there is a retirement fund that sort of works, that would work as a company. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So the second version, obviously, you need to make a lot more, 3,000 something a week, because you have to make 145 because you're paying the expenses and the health insurance. Again, I broke it down. In this version, the previous version, you work 22 hours. In this one, you work 26 hours and you make about 3,000. But I kept the same income bracket. Now, you don't have to follow my income bracket. You could do a broader one, or like I used to do less than 100, I used to do free. So I think I started with, I wanted to see 3 people for free. Yeah, I was working 30 something hours. So I did 10 for less than 100, which would be like from free to like 100. 10 for between 100 and 175. And then I did 10 from 175 to 250 back then. I was like, I don't know if I could get more than that. So that's my plan, because I'm just starting out. Who the hell knows about critical therapy? Okay. So, and that's how I did it. And then as time passed, I sort of switched to, okay, I need more hours, right? Now I need more free time to do other administrative stuff. So what are my brackets and so forth? What I will ask all of you is that there has to be at least 1 or 2 people that you end up seeing for less than 50, at least one person. And because I think that in my mind, I don't think you could say that you're practicing this model or believe in social justice and only end up working with people who have money. I also think it's good clinically, especially in the beginning, to see what happens when, you see someone who pays, 50, 75, 175. And then when you see someone who pays 275, all the anxiety that comes up around, oh my God, what am I doing? Is this person going to leave? Am I doing a good enough job? So it's good to see that. the other thing that we haven't put down in writing, but we will, is that if you see someone who pays you, I think once you get to $1 million, that person pays you about 575, I think, or 525, I don't remember. Then I am actually requiring that you see someone for free. So it's like, I just feel like, you know, I mean, I know everyone would do it, but I think it's better to put it out there so that people know that's an expectation. So for every person, I mean, there are people who are being seen at that number. It's not me, but I can tell you that if 3 people paid me 5 something, I would actually see 3 people for free. I just feel like I have to do it. But at the same time, I will also advise you, which we go back to the beginning, that if you end up seeing people who pay a lot, that you don't reduce the number of people that you see at that mid-income bracket, because it leaves you cut and dry in the sense of like, wow, Susie just left and Susie was paying $1,000 and that was my whole income and I only have 3 people. What am I going to do? Now, yeah, I think that's also important to keep in mind. Like, how do you sort of, and we've talked about how do you not privilege then the person who pays a lot. And I think to do that is just pretend it's not happening for a little bit. Yeah, so I don't know if you have particular questions about my like not very accounting like little grid over here, but just to give you an idea. Because I think I'll say this, when you look at this number, you're like, whoa, that's a lot. And then when you break down, it doesn't feel that much. It doesn't feel that unattainable, you know? And what I would say also about Psychology Today, you should put your highest number, not your lowest. Because the low fee people, you're probably going to get some of them through critical therapy, because it's either going to be students or social workers who've heard about us. So leave those slots for some of those referrals. But usually at Psychology Today, you should put your average like 175 or 150, because people will have that explanation. And then when they come to you, it's easier to have a conversation when it's like, oh no, it's actually 125, than them seeing 50 and be like, I thought I was going to pay 50. What do you mean 300?
Sylvia,
yeah, go
question.
ahead.
I just looked at your Psychology Today profile
Yes,
and I see your fee.
yes. And guess what? People still come. This lady that came today was like, I can't afford your fee, but I really like, can we work something out, whatever? And she said, maybe I come every other week. She actually does make money. She can't afford the 450. That's correct. But when she had the sliding scale, and when she looked at, she's like, I don't think I qualify. I make too much money. I was like, no, everyone qualifies. And then we went over it and she's like, oh, that's good. She pays like $275. She's like, oh, that's wonderful. I could come. So that conversation was so much more easier.
Question. It says you accept insurance plans, Aetna, Blue Cross Blue Shield, United.
I do, as out of network. Yeah, so if you don't put that, people don't know. If you just say only accept out of network, they won't know. The only thing to do is when you say accepting insurance plans, when they email or call you to say, I am an out of network provider, you could ask your, and I'll send you the questions to ask them, or if they cover and, so forth. And I could talk to you guys separately about how do you have those conversations, Now, remember, Psychology Today is a marketing tool, right? So now we have to think about, how do you pair up marketing with what we actually do? And I think when you market yourself to the world is not going to know about the sliding scale. They're not going to even care half of the time. So you market yourself to the highest sort of number, and then you calm down. And then there'll be people who you tell them about the sliding scale and they'll be like, well, forget it. I don't want to do that. Fine, they wouldn't have come to you anyway. But then there are people who be like, oh, okay, that seems fair. Or, oh, great, I could do that, Now, I'm not saying all of us, and honestly, the reason why I put such a high number is right now, I don't want to take anyone who pays less than $275, because I do want to write that book and I have people I'm still seeing for free. So and again, that's what you got to assess for yourself. It's like, and I had to, I had a moment where like, one person who is paying a fee that's kind of high is leaving. And I was like, well, should I just accept two people for like 100 or 150? And I'm like, no, I'm not going to do that because I need the time and I'm going to hold out, and eventually, and actually something came. But I think that's an individual choice and what you're comfortable with. I will tell you this, and thank you for reminding me. You have to remember that you're signing up, and this comes to Sarah's, I think, anxiety, to at least a 3-year commitment to someone. So when you think I'm going to see someone for X amount of money, know that that is the money you're going to get from them, give or take, and that is a 3-year commitment. So even if you think, well, right now I really need that extra $200 and I'll take 4 people. Yeah, but down the road, you're going to be resentful and you're going to be like, wow, I'm working for hours for like, I can't pay my bills. So you have to also put on your sort of business hat and think about how can I do this, but also what works for me. And yeah, I think that I don't know how to work around that. The truth is that for every person that you see, I hope, and we said that this process takes 3 to 5 years in most cases, for some people might be longer, but you are making a commitment. I mean, sure, things happen, life takes over, and, not all of us, we're going to, maybe be here 100% 3 years, but I think that that's the intention. So that's something to think about. It's like, it's sort of like when you marry someone, you don't just marry them because maybe it's going to work out for a year. You actually plan on being there through the process. So think, and I think this is why I use the marriage analogy with everyone that, sort of I do a assessment with, where I'm like, we're going to be dating for a little bit and then decide if we're going to get married. If we get married, we're getting married. This is it. We're stuck together. And that means, I will tell you, financially, you're stuck together. I've had people who lost, this is what happened. I ended up with all these free people because of COVID. People have lost their jobs and they were paying something and they weren't paying anything. I've also had people who inherited money and came back to me and was like, listen, now I got all this money. I want to pay you. Some person paid me from back pay. It was like, I think I should pay you for those sessions more because this was such a transformative experience. I do believe that if people know that you care and you're in it with them, they're going to be just as responsible as you. So I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind. Of course, that gets me to the second thing, the last thing, which is the sliding scale. So I know I just finished saying that people do the right thing. They will once they have a relationship with you, once they've gone through the sort of, therapy and the program of understanding how money is tied to other issues and is so tied to our capitalism. In the beginning, however, they're not going to know that. So I think you have to learn how to use the sliding scale and to be flexible, but also to not be taken for granted. So what I mean about that is when someone comes and they're supposed to pay 150 and you see the resistance because, of money, or because they don't think therapy is valuable, because they've had shitty therapy sometimes, I would say to someone, well, okay, why don't we just stay at $100 for the next 3 months and then reevaluate this, in 3 months from now. But I think when you get to the 3 months from now, you have to bring it up and you have to be much more aggressive in asking for what they should be paying. And you figure out your own way of doing it. Whether it's like, well, it's not fair, whether I say like, I really can't continue to see you for this. Maybe I don't go to 150, but I go to 125. But honestly, how do I see the person who's paying me 50 and you paying double, but you should be paying triple and feel good about myself? So I think it's learning how to negotiate, and like a good clinician, how do you work with this resistance in the beginning? And then how do you tear it down and make sure that they pay what they're supposed to? What also will happen is that people will be like, oh, I do have this money, but it's not really my money. And that's the work you have to do with them. So maybe in the beginning, you'll be like, okay, Susie, well, you'll pay this, but in the next 3 months, let's discuss this. And then you approach and discuss it, how they should be using their trust fund for therapy. the other thing is, and that could be both ways. So it could be that that fee increases over time or decreases because they lost their job and so forth. It's just you have to be able to ask what they should be paying and learn to feel comfortable about that. Because that's really important. The other thing I will say is if you end up working with people who you need to see more than once a week, sure, you're gonna do some low, like if that person is supposed to pay 100, they might not be paying 200, but they're not gonna be paying 120 for 2 sessions. I think you have to really, because I've seen that a lot. And people are like, well, I'm coming twice a week. And my argument to that is I get it. And maybe financially you can't afford the full fee, but at the same time, you're gonna finish faster. Because the idea is not like the more intense you do this work, the faster you, so the amount of money you effectively spend is the same, it's just paced out differently. So, and because I hear a lot of people, I have, you know, someone who's like, oh, so I'm coming, I could come twice a week and I'm still gonna pay the same. No, what are you crazy? I mean, so it's sort of like, how do you navigate those conversations? Now, I have talked a lot because I wanted to make sure I get it all in that hour and I'm close to it. However, I am willing to stay a little later and I hope so are you to ask or if you have any questions. That's why I talk so fast. I think I've done a good job, but go ahead.
I don't know if I have a question yet, but the things I'm thinking through in my mind, one, I'm thinking that I want to make for myself like a spreadsheet version of these sheets where then I can just plug in numbers and it calculates stuff for me so that I can play around with it like that. I'm
I
also
can send you guys this document, you know what I mean?
yeah, that would be great.
Mm.
And then I'm also thinking about for myself, like probably a strategy, at least at the beginning, that I will need or would need, especially if this is most of my income, is having like a business checking account that I pay myself out of every week or two so that the
Right.
money doesn't just kind of like all blend together.
Yes.
And then another piece of it that I'm thinking about a little bit is what if I got on an insurance panel that was one of the Medicaid managed care plans, which meant that some people who would otherwise be like maybe paying $20 or less a session, actually their insurance reimburses me at a higher rate. And then I could see more people in that like income level. And what would that look like? So that's another thing that I'm kind of playing through.
Yeah, you could certainly do that. The only issue would be if, you know, the fact that the insurance could ask you anything about these people. And the second one is that you may end up at some point doing more work because they may ask you for more paperwork. That's the only thing, you know?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
It's very interesting, Sarah. Thank you for bringing it up. Curious about that.
Yeah, that's a good plan because if you're working with people who, yeah, that it would pay to go on the managed care part, you know. I personally don't want to do the paperwork and I personally don't want the insurance company to know that much about people. And sometimes I feel like, yeah, I mean, it depends what they pay you. Because if they pay you 45 and the person's paying you 20, I'd just take the 20 and not bother with it. But that's just me. I think everyone's different. You know, like, fuck, just pay me the 20, Susie. You know. Oh, the other thing about if you get on these insurance panels is you're required to take the co-payment. So let's say the insurance pays whatever they pay you, and then Susie's supposed to pay you $30 the co-payment. You can't waiver that. You have to take the $30. Have to. So, yeah.
I think I do have another question, but if people have questions, like jump in and they can get answered in any order. I'm wondering more about what other types of specialties you've seen people develop and how you've seen people navigate that process of articulating areas of specialty, and then what other kinds of consultation projects you've seen people be able to develop using the critical therapy lens in particular.
Yeah, so if you look at our website, which will redo the inside pages, because if you look at it, you're like, oh my God, you will see that a lot of the specialties, and it's based on different people here that have different sort of like immigration issues, or it could be LGBTQ stuff, or I think, you know, cancer or terminal illness or anxiety, you know, so whatever, I think it could be two ways. For me, it ended up being what I was really into, because I developed a specialty before I even started this. I mean, I didn't even think I was going to be a therapist. So I just, you know, I thought I was going to study religious studies and do that. And I was very much into psychoanalysis. I was very much into politics, religion, blah, blah, blah. And then slowly but surely, I was like, I'm really into torture. Okay. So, and then slowly I decided that I was going to specialize in political torture and working with refugees. That's why I trained at, you know, NYU survivors of torture program. And then and the more I did that work, the more I realized that people get tortured in their homes much more, it's much more pervasive, and it's untalked about, and it's not something that people can sort of get over or master as easily. Like if you go to war, if you've been in political torture, you kind of expected that you're going to have PTSD. When you know, when your parent abuses you, it's something that's so much harder to get over. So because of that, I slowly transitioned, and I still work with like refugees and all that, but I slowly transitioned to more like of the intimate torturers. But other people end up doing by the referrals they get. It's like all of a sudden, oh my God, I'm working with 10 people who are recovering from cancer. I guess that's, or terminal illness, or it could be a specialty that you like, if there's a particular thing you're interested in, and then we could work on, you know, building your sort of expertise. And we could, whether it's like, for example, with Michael, if he's interested in couples therapy, him and I are going to work a lot at, you know, sort of developing his expertise in that. One of the things I'm looking to do as we grow, if we're teaching more classes, is once you graduate, to take electives if you want on different topics. Like, you know, it could be short term, like family counseling, or, you know, marriage counseling, or group therapy, or working with patients who have anxiety. I mean, we do that in the final seminar. We take each week and look at a particular like perversion or sexual dysfunctions or whatever. But if that's your specialty, we could do a whole course with it, you know, down the road. So that's with the specialty. The second part is, for me, it ended up getting a lot of referrals from people from different agencies that sort of wanted to work with me. Even right now, I mean, you know, I have an agency that's looking to maybe pair up with critical therapy to work with like young adults, young students. So there's always opportunities. Some of them I didn't take them because I don't want to work with young people. And I didn't have enough people. But now as we have more people, and as we are rebranding ourselves, it's going to be an opportunity, if you guys let me know what you want to do, to sort of say, we have these skills, or we have these trainings that we could do for you, or we have this person who could supervise your staff, or come in and give talks, or assess your organization on this thing. So there's, as we grow, there's bigger opportunities to be out there. I suspect, I mean, I don't know, you know, it's hard to say, like, I don't know what's gonna, you know, my goal with this book is like, hopefully a lot of people will read it so they'll know about us. They might, and then it's going to blow up, or it might not, and it's not going to blow up. But if it does end up that a lot of people read it and are interested, I think we'll get a lot more referrals, not just for psychotherapy, but for a lot of other things. One of Michael and I have talked about it. One of my interests, which I'm not doing, but I do want to do maybe next year, I wanted to do a workshop on financial intimacy. Especially around cross-class couples. And we reached out to like people like Resource Generation that was like, oh, that could be interesting. And, you know, we got, you know, I think they actually connected me to someone who was doing a paper about the sliding scale and so forth. So I think now we're more out there than we've ever been. And the reason why we've been more out there is because I've been more conscious of wanting to be out there. Whereas in the past, I didn't have the capacity. So I didn't want to go out there and be like, yeah, we could do consulting for you. And then it's like, oh yeah, we don't have anyone. We're just kidding. So I do think it would help, and I'm going to ask Michael down the road to do this probably, to send up an email to people and be like, what are some of your interests? What are some of the things you want to do? What are some of our internal resources that I know more about, so I could sort of market them, whether it's on our website, whether it's when I talk to people and so forth. And also, you know, what are the resources we each have? Because it's not like you just started out your career and you're like, I don't know anyone, I'm trying to figure it all out. You all have connections with agencies, with schools, with, you know, some of you teach somewhere. Those could be referral sources for different things. So I think if we think about it, we're much more resourceful than we are. And this is one of the things that when I say, well, you're going solo, you are and you're not, because first of all, you have all of us for support, but you also have all of us for referrals and for you know, opportunities that you don't have when you're like doing your own private practice, and you know, it's harder.
I have two more questions.
Okay.
One,
I go back to the regular screen. Wait, sorry, I'm gonna stop sharing so you can see.
Oh, okay.
What?
what's the deal with when people, if you start seeing somebody and they move and you're seeing them virtually from another state, how does that work with licensure stuff? And then the next question is, if it's something that you like care to talk about in the space, but you don't have to, have you been sued? And how did that, like, how often does that happen? I guess is really maybe even the better question, right? Like if somebody's doing this full time and seeing somewhere between 20 and 30 patients a week, or doing 20 to 30 patient hours a week, how often does getting sued come up?
Yeah, I mean, and I've never been sued. Honestly, I think it's very hard to get sued because most lawyers wouldn't take a person's case. Oh, you're not on screen, so I can't see anyway. What happens, honestly, you're gonna get sued if you sleep with a patient. Like, that's one way for sure that people will sue you, because they have enough. And you know, we all say, oh my God, that would never happen. I am telling you, I've had people that I've heard stories about. I have friends who they didn't do it, but they were on the brink of it because they were going through a divorce. So it's a very slippery slope, and you got to be super careful, especially when something happens in your own life. But it's very rare. However, that doesn't mean you should be like, oh, okay, it's never going to happen. I think and that's why you have the malpractice insurance. Now, working across different states is complicated. So one of the things that COVID did is it loosened some of those regulations for now, but there's a debate of what's going to happen. I don't know. I think they're going to go back to the old ways, which is, so if you're doing any internet, whatever, counseling or psychotherapy with someone, you're supposed to do it in the state that your patient is. So if Susie's in New York, you're in New York, you're fine. If Susie's in New York and you're in LA, you could, and you're not, and you're traveling in LA, for example, you know, if you're on vacation, you're not supposed to see Susie. It's supposed to be, you could see her if she's in New York, if it's the state that you're licensed in. It's not the state that you're in, it's the state that your patient is in, and that you're licensed in that state. Now, there is a problem and a loophole, right? So the problem is you're seeing Susie, you're licensed in New York, she's licensed in New York, and then Susie goes to California for 3 months. According to the law, you're supposed to be like, Susie, you're not gonna be here for 3 months. I can't see you. So go find another therapist and then come back, or don't go to therapy. However, there is also this loophole, which is that you cannot terminate services with someone that is in need if they don't have other therapists or they're not connected to other services. So what you could technically do is, Susie went to California, but Susie couldn't find a therapist. So you needed to see her during this time till she got back, because it would be irresponsible for you to not see her and leave her out to dry. You see what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it is tricky. Like, for example, and I think it's about risks and the relationship. Like, for example, I would never start therapy with a person that tells me, oh, I'm gonna move to California in 6 months from now, or I am not in New York, I don't think I'm coming to New York, can you see me? Even if I could, I wouldn't, because the risks are so high. That's when you could get sued, honestly. Because let's say you end up seeing Susie online. Oh, it's great. And then Susie has a breakdown, is suicidal, and you can't help her. You don't even know where Susie lives, or even if you do, who's her support system? You can't go to the hospital if she ends up, committing suicide. So I just think I am not for, and I know that a lot of people are advocating, and I am advocating that we should do away with this like state regulations. I do think people should be able to see people across states in certain circumstances. I don't think you should have a therapist in Iowa because it's cheaper, but may not be able to support you. And from a business perspective, one of my friends who's a therapist was telling me like the danger, I don't think it's a danger, but the danger with that is that if you open up across states, well, people will go to cheaper states for therapy rather than pay you. I always say, yeah, they'll come back to you because most therapists probably charging $50 an hour from Iowa, which feels like a lot, or 25, are probably not that great. And a therapist that's going to take you on and never meet you, probably not that great. So I think they'll come back to you.
Okay. I think those are all my questions for today.
All right. Well, I hope I've answered most of your questions that you all had. I don't know, try to rush through this, but.
Yeah, I think also the piece about like thinking of it as when it's a change you want to make, like just being really clear with yourself in advance and setting a timeline of this is what the timeline to transition looks like. And thinking about it also in terms of like, what's the buffer of saving of like monthly expenses that you want to have sort of ready while you are still working at your full-time job.
And to think about it, that when you start off, you don't necessarily pay rent that much, right? So, if you're seeing 2 people, we're probably not going to charge you rent, So it's sort of like that gives you a buffer as well. Then you start seeing more people, and then, you start saying, okay, maybe now I should rent a full day. I mean, you have some sort of leeway till you get there, but it is something that you build. So it doesn't feel like, oh man, I got 5 people. How am I going to pay my bills? I like to say, if you build it, they will come, but it's going to take a while till they come. It takes a little bit. And what you guys, I mean, one of the advantages of starting this way, which is very part-time, is that in some way you're building the people who are going to refer you other people. So the people you see now will probably refer other people and so forth. So that's also a beginning of referral process. And you're also figuring out what you want to focus on. If there is a particular like niche that's like, that's my thing. I love that. So thank you for the question, Sarah.
Should I stop the recording?
Yeah, and then you could